And here it is. So this, I'm focusing on developmental goal number 4, but I'm actually done to say that we need to make this available to everyone, and beginning middle school, age appropriate, and then moving forward. So personally, I came to appreciate the value of logic as a teacher of strategic management, and that is, as probably everyone here knows, the capstone course in any undergraduate and MBA program, and executive MBA program in any business school. And the way that I taught it, strategic management is the course in which all the disciplines are put together, and one is working with the question how to best prepare for the future. And this logic, as I understand it, is totally necessary, and it helps us figure out plans of action to co-create that future. And so now, what is so special about logic that I invented a special name for it, and that Jean-Yves Bézieux said we need a special day at the United Nations? As I understand it, it's something that, because of all the emphasis on computers, that we may have forgotten a little, and that logic is something that came into existence as an activity of a group of people sitting together in a circle, using their fingers to draw lines and circles in the dirt, and having a conversation with one another about the value of drawing particular distinctions while taking turns talking and listening to one another. So if we move fast forward, then we would have a group of people working collaboratively together with pen and paper. And then we can fast forward further, and then we have like a Zoom meeting where there is a whiteboard, and that people use that whiteboard to draw some lines or circles and have a discussion with one another while they're discussing some distinctions, that they give a name, and that they connect to a material practical problem in the reality. So I'm now here repeating a point that Chris made in his introduction. Thus, the manner in which logic came into existence has nothing to do with AI. Instead, it's all about people figuring out a way to solve problems together with the help of the proverbial pen and paper, and also without getting so irritated and emotional and worked up that they think it's easier to solve problems by killing one another and destroying one another's property instead of continuing to talk and brainstorm. So I kind of see the distinction as a somewhat simple distinction, but I'm also understanding that there is a lot of emotion involved, and that emotion makes it harder to understand, like, how did we end up in that situation where we use war and violence as a solution instead of just like solving the problem. And so now I'm going to use the SDG 5 to kind of illustrate how I today have a conversation with other people about how logic works. And as my title indicated, I think unfortunately today there is a wrong and a right way about talking about logic. And that is the reason that we have like 2 ongoing wars, I think. But that didn't happen overnight. That it is the result of 100 years of thinking in a slightly incorrect way about logic among university professors. So I'm a former university professor. I take responsibility for what my disciplines can do better. And so I will now illustrate this SDG 5 goal to highlight that logic helps us think about unintended consequences. So when people think about gender equality and empowering all women and girls, I live in upstate New York, and I'm get bombarded by emails sent out by Jordan Peterson, who believes who needs to think on behalf of the young white boys or any color boys who think that they are going to suffer because girls and women get empowered. And so does that if people think of logic as just drawing a distinction, then the first thing when people hear that, they think, ah, there is male and there is female. And so whatever the female gets, the male won't have. And so it kind of sets up the battle of the sexes, or the gender war, or whatever you want to call it, as we all could observe in great detail in the United States, dus in the political arena. And so what I have learned is that this is a completely wrong way of engaging with logic. And I'm here to really engage you all in whatever capacity you can to help people switch their thinking, that they think differently about logic. And so here I set up the activity of drawing a distinction as a circle. And the circle is to kind of really focus on, so what is the problem that we're trying to solve? So instead of immediately doing an either or, I focus on the problem. And here I'm emphasizing the here and now. Dus the here is that we really need to think who is talking and where are they located. So I'm here in my very cozy location in Ithaca, New York. And so I have a certain understanding, but someone who is living, as was mentioned before, in Italy or North Africa or Syria or Iraq, they have a completely different understanding. And I also emphasize January 2025 because Jordan Peterson started up an academy because he's now going to teach the dangers of wokeness. And so we in society today have to deal with a different set of problems as 10 years ago. And one of them is the misunderstanding and misuse of logic. And so dus I want to emphasize here there are always consequences that we will not have discussed appropriately. So every single conversation we at some time need to stop. So logic is very time consuming. Any deep conversation is time consuming. There always will be something important that will remain undiscussed, but that should not be a reason to not occasionally set time aside to discuss the significance of logic. And so now I'm continuing. Something I already started doing is emphasizing a key idea of Amanda Russell that she mentioned earlier, the power of story. Without warning you, I introduced a particular story. And so, but now I want to step out of that story and just remind us we live in a world full of stories. And people, they live in their story. They can't help it. For whatever reason, they chose that story. But other people can clearly see that some stories are very unproductive. And so we can say, it's not my story, it's not my problem. They can figure it out on their own. But actually, we're all connected in some way. So if there's a super unproductive story, it eventually will impinge on our story. And so it's kind of, I think, a responsibility that we need to recognize today, that we need to speak up whenever we see someone using logic in an incorrect way. And so earlier, I just gave you a dividing line with an either or, but now I can restate it in the form of the zero-sum thinking. Now, everyone here knows that we shouldn't engage in zero-sum thinking. But nevertheless, we recognize that story as problematic. But unfortunately, there's still many people that just have never heard the argument. And we can again say that they're not our problem or someone else will take care of them because I'm too busy doing my own important work. But still, it will come and haunt us. And so the problem of zero-sum thinking is that people think there is just a finite pie, and they think if someone else gets a piece, that means I'm not getting it. And then if they think if someone else gets two pieces, maybe at the end of the day, they will have the entire pie and I have nothing. So that people proactively start like fighting very hard and aggressively to have the entire pie because they think if someone else gets a small piece, then they will come back and get our piece. And so, dus that is what is called dus the zero-sum framing. And we all know that it is a frame and that it's not necessary, that there is an alternative frame, but we still have it around us. And I see this as coming from the academy where there are people, and I'm not going to name names because it's about the idea, dus that the writing philosophers that are writing papers that say it's a very perfect and legitimate and useful mode of arguing, dus you use the argument as war metaphor. And so I have a paper in front of me. I met the author. We have a friendly relation. I'm in the middle of responding, but he literally says this is a great way of arguing and there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. And then he goes and attacks anyone who dares to suggest there is something wrong with it. And now, why is this problematic? Yes, there is an alternative metaphor, and that metaphor has been around probably for 2000 years. But for some reason, people are not paying attention to it. And I'm just giving you it here as a visual. There is actually a way of arguing that's called argument as skyscraper building. And here the emphasis in an argumentation is on what is left behind. So it's not about whether you can always win the argument, as some books that you find in the bookstore say, like how to always win an argument. It's really about what happens after the argument, what are the consequences. So it's a way of thinking that we think about our unintended consequences. And the unintended consequence is if all these buildings start falling down. And so what we here see is a testament to the power of productive argumentation. Imagine this 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, people had to know how to build these things and they're all still standing. And so the question then, to get back to the developmental goal 5, is how can we shift from this divisive use of logic to the problem-solving use of logic? So what is minimally necessary to get from argument as war to argument as skyscraper building? And so now I want to end up with discussing dus that 17th SDG, and I'm going to modify it a little bit. I think what we really need is strengthen the means, so that's probably mean making money available, of implementation of global partnerships to help people understand the difference between a correct and an incorrect usage of logic. And so in this way of thinking, I, for myself, and of course different people approach it differently, I've identified kind of 4 steps. Some are under my control and some are less under my control. So first one is to go out and have discussions about incorrect use of logic, but also act as an empathy buddy for other people while they have that conversation, because it's sometimes frustration, because some people, they just immediately attack, they get triggered and they can't help it, they need to attack and bulldoze over other people in an argument. So to just be supportive for one another while we're pointing this out. And now, the second one is the logic circles. And an example, of course, is Logictry, what Chelsea and Chris are doing, and that's the way I got involved, because we literally were part of a logic circle or something similar to it in Las Vegas in November. But then the third one I want to put out there is we really need much more people who pursue PhDs in the history of the philosophy of logic to get a better understanding of what happened during the first decade of the 20th century, because then all the interesting questions were being asked about the difference between communication logic, engineering logic, and pure symbolic logic. And then World War I happened. So talking about wars, World War I, one day the people are very friendly, exchanging letters, discussing logic. The next day they get thrown in jail and they get shot if they dare to be friendly, if an Englishman dares to be friendly to someone from Germany. So we never really recovered from that World War I. And while dus there was World War II and then the Korea War, the Vietnam War, and you just continue. So people just got fed up of arguing, or they just didn't know what to do. And these questions were never properly addressed. And so then I get maybe to the last thing that can be done, and in this circle that can be further discussed. Maybe what we need is apps that can be used on phones to help people get a better understanding of logic. But obviously, that is going to be a project that requires a lot of collaboration, because a lot of people will have some insight here, and we all kind of need to work together, I guess. Thank you.